Zariah Blake transferred to Northwood High hoping for a fresh start. She was quiet, composed, and kept to herself until Ryan Carter, the school's golden boy, made her the target of a cruel, racist stunt. He ripped her braids out in front of the whole class, laughed, mocked her, thought he'd won. What he didn't know, Zariah was a national martial arts champion, and she wasn't the scared little girl from her past anymore. What happened next shook the entire school, because this time, the victim stood up, and the silence shattered. The fluorescent lights of Northwood High hummed, casting a sterile glow over Mrs. Davies's history class. Desks scraped, pencils tapped, and the murmur of teenage whispers filled the air. A familiar symphony of boredom and anticipation for the bell. Zariah Blake, new to Northwood and still navigating its labyrinthine hallways, sat near the back, her braids meticulously styled, a silent shield against the unfamiliar faces. She preferred the quiet observation, the slow absorption of her surroundings, a habit forged in the crucible of past experiences. Her eyes, dark and perceptive, scanned the room, noting the cliques, the whispered jokes, and the unspoken hierarchies. Northwood felt different from her previous schools, a subtle undercurrent of tension that she couldn't quite place, but instinctively recognized. Ryan Carter, the undisputed king of Northwood's social scene, sprawled across his desk in the front row, his laughter echoing a little too loudly, his confident swagger setting the rhythm for his loyal entourage. His casual disdain for authority was almost as pronounced as his carefully cultivated charisma. Today, his gaze, sharp and predatory, had inexplicably landed on Zariah. A ripple of nervous energy spread through the room as Ryan slowly turned, his eyes narrowing, a smirk playing on his lips. His friends, a mix of jocks and popular girls, subtly shifted their attention, sensing the impending performance. This wasn't just a classroom, it was Ryan's stage, and Zariah, unknowingly, had become his target. The lecture droned on, a forgotten soundtrack to the rising tension. Zariah felt Ryan's eyes on her, a persistent, unnerving weight. She kept her gaze fixed on her textbook. Feigning absorption, a learned defense mechanism, she'd always preferred to blend in, to become invisible, especially in new environments. But Ryan Carter didn't deal in invisibility. He thrived on spectacle, on dominance, and on making others acutely aware of their place. Suddenly, a loud, artificial cough ripped through the quiet classroom, drawing Mrs. Davies' attention. Ryan, feigning innocence, pointed a theatrical finger at Zariah. "I think someone needs to learn some manners," he announced, his voice carrying clearly. Mrs. Davies, flustered, merely blinked, her usual sternness dissolving under Ryan's disarming charm. This was the unspoken rule at Northwood. Ryan Carter operated with an almost untouchable impunity. Zariah's grip tightened on her pencil. She felt a prickle of unease, a familiar sensation she had hoped to leave behind. She wished the floor would swallow her whole, or the bell would ring, offering a merciful escape. But the bell remained stubbornly silent, and Ryan, emboldened by the lack of immediate reprimand, rose from his seat. His friends chuckled, a low, guttural sound that seemed to snake through the rows of desks, slowly, deliberately. Ryan sauntered down the aisle, his footsteps, though light, seemed to pound in Zariah's ears. Every eye in the room followed his movement, a silent, complicit audience. Zariah's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the growing dread. She could feel the heat of his presence before he even reached her desk. He stopped beside her, his shadow falling over her textbook. The air crackled with a palpable tension, a hush falling over the classroom so profound that even Mrs. Davies paused her lecture, her gaze flicking nervously between Ryan and Zariah. Then, with a sudden, swift motion, Ryan reached out, his fingers, surprisingly strong, wrapped around one of Zariah's thick, intricately braided extensions. He gave a sharp, vicious tug. The sudden pain shot through Zariah's scalp, a searing jolt that made her gasp. A few strands of hair, ripping from their roots, dangled from his grasp, a stark, painful testament to his aggression. A collective gasp rippled through the class, quickly followed by a stunned silence. Students leaned forward, their expressions a mix of shock, fear, and morbid curiosity. Ryan, holding the dislodged braids aloft like a trophy, grinned, a cruel, triumphant sneer distorting his features. "What's this? A new fashion statement?" he scoffed, his voice dripping with condescension. Then, louder, his voice echoing with calculated venom. He spat. "This school is for white people. Only white people go back to where you belong." The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Zariah's vision blurred. Not from tears, but from a surge of raw, unfamiliar fury. The pain in her scalp was nothing compared to the searing insult. The brutal public degradation. Her quiet, carefully constructed facade shattered. Her hand instinctively shot up, her fingers clenching into a tight fist, the knuckles white. Mrs. Davies finally stirred, her face pale. "Ryan, what do you think you're doing?" she stammered, her voice thin and ineffective. But the damage was done. The classroom, once a place of mundane routine, had transformed into an arena of overt racial hostility. Some students shifted uncomfortably, their faces etched with discomfort. Others, Ryan's loyal followers, merely watched, their expressions unreadable, a silent endorsement of his hateful act. Zariah slowly rose from her seat, her movements deliberate, almost unnervingly calm. Her eyes, usually reserved and guarded, now blazed with a cold, fierce intensity that Ryan, caught in the throes of his performance, failed to register. He still clutched the braids, a symbol of his perceived victory. He had underestimated her, gravely so. He saw a quiet new girl, an easy target. He had no idea he had just cut the hair of a national martial arts medalist, a girl who had vowed never again to be a victim. The very air around Zariah seemed to hum, charged with a latent energy that only a select few, like her former martial arts coach, would recognize. The bell still hadn't rung. The history lesson was over. A different kind of lesson was about to begin. The searing pain in Zariah's scalp, the shock of Ryan's hateful words echoing in the stunned classroom, was a familiar ache, a phantom limb of a past trauma she had tried desperately to amputate from her memory. Her mind, in a defensive reflex, recoiled from the present humiliation, pulling her back to a time and place she rarely revisited, Cedar Creek Middle School. 3 years prior, it was a place where whispers grew into shouts, where isolation became a constant companion, and where a quiet, artistic 12-year-old Zariah first learned the harsh lessons of prejudice. Cedar Creek had been different, smaller, seemingly idyllic, nestled in a community that prided itself on its traditional values. But those values, Zariah quickly discovered, often masked a deep-seated intolerance. She was one of only a handful of black students, and the subtle exclusion began almost immediately. Invitations to birthday parties never materialized. Lunchroom tables always seemed to fill up just as she approached. Her vibrant drawings, once praised by teachers, suddenly garnered strange, dismissive glances from peers. She felt like an alien, an anomaly in a sea of sameness. The taunts started subtly, like a low hum beneath the surface of everyday life. Comments about her hair, her lunch, the way she spoke. "Why do you talk like that? Is that even real hair?" Zariah, a naturally sensitive child, retreated further into herself. She confided in her mother, who, with a weary sigh, reminded her to be strong. "Zariah, don't let them see you crack." Her father, a stoic man, advised her to keep your head down and focus on your studies. Their ignorance is their problem, not yours. They believed in quiet resilience, in weathering the storm, a philosophy born from their own lived experiences. Zariah, desperate for peace, adopted it as her own. Then came the incident that irrevocably altered her path. It was a cold Tuesday afternoon. During recess, Zariah was sitting alone beneath a sprawling oak tree, sketching in her notebook, lost in the intricate patterns of leaves. A group of boys, older and louder than the others, approached, led by Mark, a lanky, aggressive kid who had made it his personal mission to torment her. He snatched her sketchbook, ripping pages from it with a cruel laugh. "What's this ugly drawings from an ugly girl?" he sneered, his friends echoing his mockery. Zariah, overwhelmed by the suddenness and cruelty, felt a hot rush of shame and helplessness. She tried to snatch her book back, but Mark shoved her. Hard. She stumbled, falling to the ground, her knees scraping painfully against the gravel. As she lay there, stunned and bruised, Mark deliberately stomped on her sketchbook, grinding his heel into her carefully drawn images. "You don't belong here," he snarled, his eyes blazing with a hatred that chilled her to the bone. "Go back to your own kind." The playground, usually a cacophony of shouts and laughter, had gone silent. Children watched, frozen, from a distance. No teachers intervened. No friends rushed to her aid. Zariah lay on the ground, tears blurring her vision, a profound sense of isolation washing over her. It wasn't just the physical pain, it was the chilling realization that she was utterly alone, vulnerable, and unseen. That day, she learned that silence and endurance, while offering temporary peace, ultimately provided no true protection. It was then, amidst the shattered remnants of her drawings and her bruised spirit, that a tiny, defiant spark ignited within her. Her parents, horrified by the visible bruises and the quiet despair that now clung to their daughter, realized their advice had failed. Her father, a man of few words but profound convictions, sought out a solution. He remembered a local martial arts dojo, run by an older, stern but respected sensei, Coach Silas. Silas, a former Marine sergeant, was known for his rigorous discipline and his unwavering belief in self-reliance. Zariah, initially hesitant, agreed to try. The dojo was a stark contrast to the quiet isolation of her home and the hostile chaos of school. Here, there was order, respect, and a profound sense of purpose. Coach Silas was unyielding. He pushed Zariah beyond her perceived limits, both physically and mentally. He taught her not just how to punch and kick, but how to breathe, how to focus, how to channel her fear and anger into controlled power. "Your body is a weapon, Zariah," he'd say, his voice gruff but kind. "But your mind is the ultimate arsenal. Never let anyone disarm it." She trained relentlessly. Hours melted into days, days into weeks. Her small frame grew stronger, her movements precise. She learned to anticipate, to react, to defend. The physical training was grueling, but it was the mental transformation that truly redefined her. With every successful block, every perfectly executed kick, she rebuilt her confidence, brick by painful brick. The shame of Cedar Creek began to recede, replaced by a burgeoning sense of self-worth. The fear that had once paralyzed her was slowly replaced by a quiet, fierce determination. She competed in local tournaments, then regional, then national. Each medal, a testament to her dedication, was a visible manifestation of her internal triumph. She learned to control her emotions, to remain outwardly calm even when her adrenaline surged. This quiet strength, this disciplined composure, became her new shield. She rarely spoke of her past, preferring to let her actions speak for themselves. The experience at Cedar Creek had taught her that vulnerability was a luxury she couldn't afford, that silence was a strategy, not a weakness, and that true power lay in knowing when to endure and when to strike. This carefully constructed fortress of self-control was what Ryan Carter had just so carelessly breached. The yank on her braids, the hateful words, had not merely inflicted pain, they had shattered the fragile peace she had painstakingly built. The Zariah who had fallen at Cedar Creek, helpless and alone, was long gone. In her place stood a fighter, tempered by trials, honed by discipline. The silence that had followed Ryan's taunt was not born of fear, but of a momentary shock that something so overtly hateful could happen again. But that shock was rapidly giving way to something far more dangerous for Ryan Carter: a cold, resolute fury that demanded a reckoning. The past, once a prison of pain, had now become the furnace of her resolve. Despite the glaring public humiliation in Mrs. Davies's class, Northwood High, with its polished floors and brightly lit corridors, seemed to absorb the incident with an unsettling ease. The principal, Harrison, a man perpetually clad in ill-fitting suits in an air of quiet distraction, had merely issued Ryan a stern warning and suggested Zariah consider a different hairstyle. The guidance counselor, Ms. Albright, offered sympathetic murmurs and an assortment of brochures on coping with new environments. The general consensus among the faculty, subtly conveyed through averted gazes and hushed conversations, was that Zariah should simply move on, forget about it. This casual dismissal, this systemic shrug of indifference, was perhaps more insidious than Ryan's overt cruelty. It signaled to Zariah that at Northwood, prejudice wasn't an anomaly, it was an undercurrent, woven into the very fabric of the institution. Zariah tried. She really did. She kept her head down, focusing intensely on her studies. A familiar refuge. She walked the halls with a composed, almost detached air, her eyes scanning, observing, but rarely lingering. She chose quiet corners in the library for lunch, avoiding the bustling cafeteria where Ryan and his cohort held court. She dressed simply, aiming for anonymity. Despite her innate sense of style, she wanted to believe that if she just conformed, if she just disappeared into the background, the hostility would dissipate, the subtle venom would cease. But Northwood, it seemed, had a sophisticated, almost invisible network of discrimination. It wasn't always loud shouts or physical assaults. It was 1,000 tiny cuts. In class, Zariah's hand, when raised, was often overlooked in favor of a louder, whiter voice. Group projects mysteriously formed without her. Her locker, tucked away in an obscure corner, often had smudged handprints or vague, unsettling scrawls that vanished before she could report them. Her textbooks would occasionally go missing from her desk, only to reappear hours later, slightly defaced. It was never enough to warrant a formal complaint, never overt enough for anyone to definitively point a finger. It was just enough to make her feel constantly unwelcome, perpetually on edge. The microaggressions, like tiny, buzzing insects, relentlessly chipped away at her resolve. In art class, a student accidentally spilled paint on her elaborate sketch of a black woman, then offered a condescending, "Oh, honey, I just didn't see you there." In the gym, during basketball practice, passes often sailed over her head or landed short, accompanied by exaggerated sighs from her teammates. Even her teachers, while never overtly hostile, seemed to operate under a subtle bias. Mrs. Davies, after the incident, seemed to avoid eye contact, her questions directed elsewhere. Mr. Henderson, the math teacher, would sometimes linger longer at Ryan's desk, offering extra help, while Zariah, who consistently scored higher, received only a cursory nod. The most disheartening aspect was the silence of her peers. The students who had gasped during Ryan's public display now averted their eyes, their discomfort a palpable wall around her. They would whisper, glance, and then quickly look away, afraid to be associated with her, afraid to draw Ryan's ire upon themselves. A few, like Sarah, a quiet girl with bright, curious eyes, would sometimes offer a fleeting, sympathetic smile, but it never blossomed into an offer of friendship. Zariah understood. The social currency at Northwood was conformity, and speaking out against Ryan was a sure path to ostracization. She didn't blame them, not entirely. She understood the fear. She had lived it. The daily grind of subtle discrimination began to wear on her. The quiet strength she had forged in the dojo felt under siege. Her sleep grew fitful, punctuated by restless thoughts. She found herself clenching her jaw, her shoulders constantly tense. She started to dread school, the oppressive atmosphere making each day feel like an uphill battle. The peace she had sought, the normalcy she craved, remained elusive. Northwood High, despite its superficial veneer of order, was a crucible of quiet prejudice, systematically eroding her sense of belonging. One afternoon, during lunch, Zariah watched Ryan and his friends laughing boisterously at a table near the window. He caught her eye across the cafeteria, and instead of the usual sneer, he offered a slow, deliberate smile, devoid of humor, brimming with a chilling sense of victory. It was a smile that conveyed, without a single word, that he knew he had won, that he had established his dominance, and that the school tacitly supported him. It was a clear, unspoken message. You're an outsider here, and you always will be. This quiet, insidious form of racism, far more difficult to confront than outright aggression, slowly chipped away at Zariah's resilience. It created a constant, low-grade anxiety, a feeling of being perpetually under scrutiny, judged, and found wanting. She found herself questioning her own reactions, wondering if she was overreacting, if she was seeing slights where none existed. The gaslighting effect of systemic discrimination was insidious, designed to make the victim doubt their own perceptions. But beneath the weariness, the core of Zariah's fighting spirit remained, dormant but not extinguished. The image of Mark stomping on her drawings, the memory of Coach Silas's stern but encouraging words, flickered in her mind. She had chosen silence at Cedar Creek out of fear, but she had emerged from that silence with strength. Northwood's quiet war of attrition was different, more subtle, but equally damaging. The internal debate simmered. How long could she endure this subtle erosion of her spirit? How long before the quiet endurances she had mastered morphed into self-erasure? The question hung heavy in the air, a precursor to an inevitable shift. The silent battle was nearing its breaking point. The simmering frustration within Zariah finally reached a boiling point one blustery Tuesday afternoon. Not in the confines of a classroom, but on the sprawling, manicured lawn that served as Northwood's quad. It was during an impromptu, student-led debate club meeting, an activity Zariah had reluctantly joined, hoping to find a small pocket of intellectual engagement free from the pervasive social anxieties. The topic was equity in education, a subject Zariah felt deeply, if silently, about. Ryan Carter, predictably, was present, not as a participant, but as a disruptive observer, flanked by his usual sycophants. He leaned against a tall oak tree, arms crossed, a mocking smile playing on his lips as various students articulated their points. Zariah, having prepared diligently, finally mustered the courage to speak. Her voice, usually quiet, gaining a surprising firmness as she began to outline the systemic biases she believed permeated school systems. She spoke of the unequal allocation of resources, the implicit biases in disciplinary actions, and the psychological toll of subtle discrimination. Drawing on her own painful observations without it explicitly revealing her personal experiences, as she spoke, a ripple of quiet understanding, almost imperceptible, passed through some of the students. Sarah, the quiet girl with curious eyes, nodded almost imperceptibly. Even a few of Ryan's usual hangers-on seemed to listen, their expressions momentarily losing their usual glibness. Zario, for the first time since the hair incident, felt a flicker of hope, a sense of being heard, perhaps even understood. But that flicker was brutally extinguished by Ryan, just as Zariah was reaching the crux of her argument, elaborating on the importance of an inclusive environment. Ryan straightened up from the tree, a sneer twisting his features. "Oh, listen to Miss Expert," he drawled, his voice loud enough to carry across the quad, disrupting the debate. "She just got here, and she's already complaining about how unfair everything is. Maybe some people just aren't cut out for places like Northwood. Maybe some people just cause problems." His words, delivered with a casual cruelty, struck Zariah like a physical blow. The unspoken implication, the thinly veiled racial slur, hung heavy in the air. The debate moderator, a timid senior, stammered, unsure how to respond. The other students, who had just moments before shown signs of engagement, now averted their eyes, the wall of discomfort returning. Zariah felt her carefully constructed composure begin to crack. The familiar shame, the sense of isolation, threatened to overwhelm her. Her hand instinctively clenched at her side, a silent echo of the training that had once been her lifeline, just as the hot flush of anger began to consume her. A low, guttural growl rippled through the air. Everyone froze, their heads snapping toward the sound. From behind a thick bush, a large, shaggy German shepherd mix emerged, its teeth bared in a silent snarl, its eyes fixed on Ryan. It was Eli, the school's unofficial mascot, a stray who had been unofficially adopted by the groundskeeper, Mr. Henderson, a kind, elderly man who often let Eli roam freely. Eli, usually gentle and friendly, was known for his uncanny ability to sense distress, a trait Mr. Henderson attributed to his rough past. Eli took a slow, deliberate step forward, another low growl rumbling in his chest. His posture was aggressive, defensive, his focus solely on Ryan. Ryan, for all his bluster, visibly recoiled, a flicker of genuine fear crossing his face. He stumbled backward, his usual swagger completely gone. His friends, suddenly less brave without their leader's confidence, also shuffled uncomfortably. Zariah, momentarily startled by the dog's sudden appearance, then felt a strange surge of warmth, a profound sense of unexpected solidarity. Eli wasn't just a dane. He was a silent, furry champion, instinctively defending her when no human dared. His presence, his palpable anger, was a clear, undeniable rebuke to Ryan's bullying. Ryan, recovering slightly, tried to regain his composure. "What the hell, dog?" he muttered, but his voice lacked its usual bite. Eli, however, was not appeased. With a sharp bark, he took another step, closer this time, his hackles raised. The unspoken threat was clear: back off. Just then, Henderson, alerted by the commotion, appeared, whistling sharply. Eli, with a final, lingering glare at Ryan, slowly retreated, his tail giving a single, defiant wag before he disappeared behind the bush. The tension, however, remained. The incident shattered the carefully constructed silence surrounding Ryan's behavior. While no one spoke aloud, Eli's intervention had served as a powerful, nonverbal act of resistance. It had validated Zariah's feelings, acknowledging the injustice in a way no human at Northwood had. More importantly, it had publicly exposed Ryan's vulnerability, stripping away his aura of untouchable authority. His face was still pale, his bravado visibly shaken. Later that day, as Zariah walked home, lost in thought, she heard quick footsteps behind her. It was Sarah. Sarah approached tentatively, her eyes still holding that sympathetic spark. "Hey," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What Ryan said, it was messed up. Eli, he's a good judge of character." She offered a small, hesitant smile. It wasn't a grand gesture, no public outcry or dramatic stand, but it was a small crack in the wall of silence, a tiny seed of connection, offering a hint that Zariah was not entirely alone. Eli's intuitive act had broken the spell of fear, inspiring a quiet, human act of empathy. This small but significant shift signaled that the tide, however slowly, was beginning to turn. The first act of resistance, fueled by an unlikely ally, had occurred, setting the stage for more direct confrontation. The subtle shift in Northwood's atmosphere, the hesitant glances from peers, and Sarah's quiet camaraderie had stoked a dormant fire within Zariah. She knew the time for quiet endurance had passed. The passive acceptance of systemic prejudice was no longer an option. The casual dismissal of her humiliation, the school's tacit approval of Ryan's bigotry, solidified her resolve. This was no longer just about her. It was about exposing the rot beneath Northwood's polished facade. The stage for this reckoning was the annual School Spirit Week Assembly, an event meant to celebrate unity, but, in Zariah's eyes, was a performative farce. The entire student body and faculty packed into the vast gymnasium, a cacophony of adolescent energy that quickly faded as Principal Harrison began his platitudes about inclusion and diversity. His words, hollow and meaningless in the face of lived experience, grated on Zariah, fueling her simmering indignation. Unbeknownst to most, Ryan Carter, ever the orchestrator of chaos, had planned a prank designed to mock every pretense of Northwood's inclusivity. As Harrison droned on, a sudden commotion erupted from the side doors. Ryan and his brazen cohort burst onto the gym floor, their faces hidden by grotesque, exaggerated caricatures of minority groups. They sprinted across the polished wood, holding aloft crude, hand-painted signs. One screamed, "Northwood for natives only." Another shrieked, "Keep Northwood pure." The immediate reaction was a bewildered hush, followed by a few nervous titters from those who thought it was simply a crude joke. But Zariah saw beyond the masks and the forced humor. She saw the raw, unfiltered hate, the blatant racism that had been festering, unchallenged in these very halls. This wasn't a prank, it was an open declaration of war on anyone who dared to be different. A cold calm descended upon Zariah, her heart hammered, but her mind was razor sharp. This was it, the culmination of Cedar Creek, of the constant microaggressions at Northwood, of Ryan's unchecked power, before anyone, including the stunned Principal Harrison, could even process the audacity of the act. Zariah moved, with a burst of controlled speed, a blur of motion born from years of disciplined training. She shot forward from her seat. Her movements were fluid, precise, honed for confrontation. She didn't shout, she didn't warn. Her focus was absolute. Ryan, basking in the initial shock of his audience, stumbled as Zariah closed in. He hadn't anticipated a direct challenge, least of all from his quiet victim. In a lightning-fast, almost imperceptible motion, Zariah executed a disarming technique. Her hand snapped out, not with brute force, but with a trained precision that allowed her to snatch the Northwood for natives only sign directly from his grasp. The flimsy cardboard ripped with a sharp, echoing shkt, a sound that sliced through the stunned silence of the gymnasium. Ryan stared, his grotesque mask briefly slipping to reveal a flicker of pure, unadulterated shock and humiliation. His friends froze, their own offensive signs still hovering awkwardly in the air. Zariah pivoted, her eyes blazing with a fierce, controlled fury. She held the torn, hateful sign aloft, its vile message now undeniably clear to every witness in the silent gym. Her voice, usually a gentle murmur, now resonated with an unexpected power, filling the cavernous space. "This is not school spirit," she declared, her gaze sweeping across the sea of bewildered faces, challenging every student, every faculty member. "This is hate. This is what Ryan Carter truly believes, and this is what Northwood High has allowed to fester." She then turned her blazing gaze directly on Ryan's trembling friends. "And you," she challenged, her voice dripping with accusation, "are complicit in this hatred." Principal Harrison finally found his voice, stammering, "Zariah, what are you doing?" But his authority had evaporated. "It's true," a new voice rang out, trembling but resolute. Sarah, rising from her seat, pointed a shaky finger at Ryan. He pulled Zariah's hair. "The school did nothing. He's been doing this stuff all year." Her unplanned testimony, raw and emotional, shattered any remaining ambiguity. Then, from the back of the gym, the kindly groundskeeper, Mr. Henderson, stepped forward, his face etched with indignation. Eli, the loyal German shepherd mix, trotted silently by his side. "And he's been harassing her and other students for weeks," Mr. Henderson affirmed, his voice firm. "Eli here knows it. He doesn't bark at just anyone." This unlikely corroboration, the dog's silent judgment, provided undeniable, irrefutable evidence of Ryan's pattern of abuse. The gymnasium erupted. Whispers turned into shouts, gasps into indignant murmurs. Students pointed at Ryan, now a pathetic figure, stripped of his mask and his bravado, his face a contorted mask of fury and shame. The prank had spectacularly imploded, transforming into a public expose. Zariah stood tall amidst the chaos, not as a victim, but as a catalyst. She had not only confronted her tormentor, she had, with the sudden collective weight of emerging witnesses, torn down the flimsy veil of systemic indifference that had allowed Northwood's hidden prejudice to flourish. The truth, undeniable and ugly, was now laid bare for everyone to see. The assembly, meant to foster unity, had become a crucible of truth, igniting a long overdue reckoning. The immediate aftermath of Zariah's explosive confrontation in the gymnasium was pure pandemonium. Principal Harrison, his face a ghastly shade of white, struggled to regain control, his attempts at reasserting authority drowned out by the rising tide of student outrage and whispered accusations. Ryan Carter, stripped of his bravado, stood frozen, his mask of fury slowly giving way to a desperate, cornered animal look. The weight of collective condemnation bore down on him. The offensive signs, now scattered on the gym floor, served as damning evidence of his calculated malice. Within minutes, the assembly was dismissed, not with the usual orderly exodus, but with a chaotic rush of students eager to dissect the unprecedented events. Cell phones, already buzzing with grainy videos captured during the incident, became conduits for the rapidly spreading news. The phrase "Northwood for natives only" and Zariah's defiant stand were instantly viral. The school administration, typically slow and deliberate, found itself caught in a maelstrom of public scrutiny it was ill-equipped to handle. Principal Harrison, under immense pressure, first tried to frame the incident as an isolated student prank gone wrong. He called Zariah, Ryan, Sarah, and Mr. Henderson into his office, a sterile room dominated by a large, imposing mahogany desk. His initial approach was placatory, attempting to minimize the racial undertones and urging everyone to move past this unfortunate misunderstanding. He offered Zariah a perfunctory apology for any discomfort caused and suggested disciplinary action for Ryan would be handled internally. But Zariah, fueled by the morning's courage, refused to be silenced. This wasn't a misunderstanding, Mr. Harrison, she stated, her voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. This was hate speech, and it's been happening for a long time, right under your nose. She recounted the hair incident, the microaggressions, the systematic exclusion. Her words sharp with suppressed anger. Sarah, sitting beside her, nodded emphatically, adding details about Ryan's history of bullying and the faculty's inaction. Mr. Henderson, with Eli lying calmly at his feet, corroborated their accounts, emphasizing how frequently he had witnessed Ryan's intimidation tactics and how often Zariah had been the target. Ryan, meanwhile, attempted to deflect, to charm, to deny. He claimed it was just a joke, a misunderstanding of Spirit Week traditions, but his usual charisma failed him. The evidence, the tearing sound of the sign, Zariah's unwavering accusation, and the collective memory of hundreds of witnesses in the gym painted a damning picture. The turning point came when Zariah, thinking quickly, mentioned her national martial arts background. I train in self-defense, she stated, her gaze unwavering. I chose not to use physical force today, but I am not a victim, and I will not be silent. The quiet assertion of her physical capability, combined with her composed defiance, seemed to finally penetrate Harrison's thick skull. The realization that he was dealing with someone far more formidable than he'd initially perceived began to dawn on him. Outside the principal's office, the community was already responding. Parents, alerted by their children's frenzied texts and social media posts, began to flood the school phone lines. Local news outlets, tipped off by outraged students and parents, started descending on Northwood High, their cameras and microphones poised. The images of the offensive signs and Zariah's calm defiance were already circulating widely, igniting a fiery debate online about systemic racism in schools. Under mounting external pressure, Principal Harrison was forced to escalate his response. He announced Ryan's immediate suspension, not just for the prank, but for a full investigation into multiple allegations of harassment and racial discrimination. This initial step, though reluctant, was a direct consequence of Zariah's public stand and the immediate digital dissemination of the event. The school board, facing a public relations nightmare, called an emergency meeting. Calls for Harrison's resignation began to surface from enraged parents and community activists. Northwood High, once a bastion of quiet privilege, was now a symbol of unchecked prejudice. Ryan Carter's world began to crumble. His parents, initially dismissive, quickly realized the severity of the situation when local law enforcement, prompted by a formal complaint filed by Zariah's parents and a civil rights group, began their own investigation. While no immediate arrests were made, the threat of legal action, including potential charges for hate speech and assault for the hair-pulling incident, loomed large. Ryan, no longer the untouchable king, became withdrawn, his popular friends visibly distancing themselves as the social cost of association became too high. Some even started anonymously posting their own stories of his bullying. Emboldened by Zariah's courage, the faculty, too, began to face consequences. Mrs. Davies and Miss Albright, among others, were called in for questioning by the school board, their past inactions scrutinized. The passive complicity that had allowed Ryan to thrive was now being exposed, piece by piece. The school board, in a rare public statement, vowed to implement new, stricter anti-discrimination policies and mandated diversity training for all staff. The Northwood community, once seemingly unified in its silence, fractured. There were still those who defended Ryan, claiming political correctness had gone too far, or that Zariah was making a mountain out of a molehill. But a powerful counter-narrative was rapidly gaining momentum, a grassroots movement, spearheaded by concerned parents and former students, began organizing peaceful protests outside the school, demanding accountability and lasting change. News channels ran features on Zariah's courage, contrasting her quiet dignity with Ryan's blatant hate. Zariah, though still wary, felt a profound sense of purpose. The consequences for Ryan were just beginning, and the school was finally being forced to confront its deep-seated issues. But more importantly, her act had ignited a wider conversation, a spark of hope that change, real and lasting, might finally come to Northwood. The community, once passive, was now actively engaged, divided yet awakening, driven by the dramatic truth Zariah had bravely unveiled. The dust settled, but the tremors from Zariah's stand continued to reverberate through Northwood and beyond. The immediate consequences for Ryan Carter were swift and public, a prolonged suspension, coupled with intense scrutiny from local law enforcement and civil rights groups. His family, once influential, found themselves mired in a public relations nightmare, their social standing eroded by the undeniable evidence of their son's bigotry. Teachers like Mrs. Davies and Mrs. Albright faced disciplinary reviews, their complicity in turning a blind eye now laid bare. Mr. Harrison, the principal, was placed on administrative leave, pending a full investigation into the school's systemic failures. Northwood High, once a symbol of quiet privilege, became a crucible of necessary, if painful, change. For Zariah, the initial wave of adrenaline subsided, replaced by a profound weariness, but also a quiet sense of triumph. The public humiliation she had endured had morphed into public vindication. Yet, the work was far from over. Rebuilding, she realized, meant not just repairing what had been broken, but actively constructing something stronger, more equitable. Her first step was to share her story, not for personal glory, but to galvanize the nascent movement for change. She started small, cautiously at first. Her first interview was with a local student journalist, a quiet girl named Maya who had witnessed the assembly and felt compelled to write about it. Zariah spoke with a calm, unwavering voice, recounting the hair incident, the subtle, insidious microaggressions, and the crushing weight of systemic indifference. She articulated the deep emotional toll of constantly being made to feel less than some, but also the fierce determination that had fueled her stand. Maya's article, published in the school newspaper and quickly picked up by a local online youth platform, resonated powerfully. It wasn't a sensationalized account, but a raw, honest narrative of resilience. The article gained immediate traction. Students, who had been too afraid to speak out, found solace and courage in Zariah's words. Anonymous messages of support flooded her social media, many revealing similar experiences of subtle discrimination at Northwood and other schools. "I thought I was the only one," read one message. "Thank you for saying what we were all too scared to." These messages, a testament to the pervasive nature of the problem, solidified Zariah's conviction that her voice was a vital tool. Encouraged by this outpouring, Zariah agreed to a series of interviews with local news channels. These were more challenging, the bright lights and probing questions demanding a heightened level of composure, but Zariah, drawing on her martial arts discipline, maintained her steady demeanor. She spoke not just about Ryan, but about the deeper issue of implicit bias, the death by 1,000 cuts that many students of color experienced. She advocated for mandatory diversity training for staff, for clear anti-discrimination policies, and for a more inclusive curriculum that reflected the diverse experiences of all students. She stressed that the problem was not just individual bigots, but a system that enabled them. Her story, carried on local news, then syndicated to national platforms, began to gain significant traction on social media. A new hashtag emerged, #StandWithZariah. It became a rallying cry for students and activists across the country. Her image, poised, articulate, and fiercely determined, became a symbol of quiet strength in the face of injustice. Memes featuring her disarming Ryan and holding up the torn sign circulated widely, each one a powerful testament to her courage. Local community groups, including established civil rights organizations and parent associations, reached out, inviting Zariah to speak at their meetings and rallies. She found herself addressing diverse audiences, from concerned parents in quiet suburban living rooms to passionate activists in bustling community centers. Each time, she refined her message, focusing on the importance of allyship, education, and collective action. She often highlighted the role of Sarah and Mr. Henderson, demonstrating that change required more than just individual courage. It needed a network of support. During one such speaking engagement, a former student from Cedar Creek Middle School approached her. "I remember you," the young woman said, her eyes filled with recognition and regret. "I was there that day. I didn't do anything. I'm so sorry." Zariah, for the first time, felt a flicker of healing from her deepest wound. Her public advocacy wasn't just about Northwood. It was, in a quiet way, about confronting and healing the lingering pain of her own past. Her digital footprint grew exponentially. Online petitions demanding comprehensive reforms at Northwood garnered tens of thousands of signatures. A fund was established in her name to support anti-bullying and diversity initiatives in schools. Zariah, still a teenager, found herself at the forefront of a burgeoning movement, her quiet voice now amplified by thousands. She spent hours replying to messages, validating experiences, and offering encouragement, transforming her personal trauma into a powerful catalyst for collective action. She recognized the immense responsibility that came with this newfound platform. She continued to engage with her martial arts coach, Silas, who provided guidance on managing the mental and emotional demands of her public role. "You're fighting a different kind of battle now, Zariah," he'd tell her, "but the principles are the same: discipline, focus, and knowing when to use your strength." She also sought out legal counsel, ensuring that her activism remained strategic and impactful, pushing for evidence-based justice rather than emotional reaction. The rebuilding process was complex, requiring not only courage but also careful, deliberate action, as Zariah transformed her personal fight into a public crusade for change. Months later, the hum of Northwood High felt different. The sterile halls, once echoing with unspoken bias, now carried the vibrant sounds of a school actively grappling with its past. The whirlwind of public scrutiny, legal challenges, and community activism had forced profound changes. Ryan Carter, stripped of his social power and facing serious legal repercussions, was expelled from Northwood High and subsequently faced hate crime charges. While the outcome of his court case was still pending, the immediate loss of his privileged status and the very real threat of legal consequence served as a stark, undeniable form of justice. His carefully constructed world had crumbled, a direct result of Zariah's unyielding courage. Principal Harrison, after a damning internal investigation, was forced to resign. His passive complicity, the willful ignorance of systemic racism, was deemed untenable. Mrs. Davies and Mrs. Albright, along with several other faculty members who had turned a blind eye, underwent mandatory re-education and faced official reprimands, a public acknowledgement of their professional failings. The school board, under intense pressure from parent groups and civil rights organizations, overhauled its anti-discrimination policies, introducing clearer reporting mechanisms, establishing an independent ombudsman for student complaints, and implementing comprehensive, ongoing diversity and inclusion training for all staff and students. Northwood, once a symbol of exclusion, was slowly, painfully, being remade into a model of accountability. The changes were palpable. New student-led diversity clubs flourished, their meetings vibrant with passionate discussions. A dedicated mural celebrating various cultures adorned the once bare cafeteria wall, painted by students, including Zariah. The library now boasted an expanded section on diverse histories and social justice. The silence that had once protected bigotry was shattered, replaced by an earnest, if sometimes awkward, dialogue about respect and understanding. The true culmination of Zariah's journey, however, arrived during the school's annual Spirit Week assembly. Now reimagined as a community unity day, the gymnasium, the scene of her original confrontation, was transformed. Banners proclaiming Northwood United and strength through diversity hung from the rafters. Students from all backgrounds mingled freely, a palpable sense of shared purpose replacing the old divisions. The event began with earnest speeches from the new principal, a dynamic woman of color named Dr. Evelyn Reed, who spoke with refreshing candor about the school's past failings and its commitment to a truly inclusive future. Sarah, now an active member of the student council, spoke eloquently about the importance of speaking up, her once timid voice now ringing with quiet confidence. Mr. Henderson, beaming, sat in the front row, Eli curled peacefully at his feet, both receiving an ovation for their unexpected roles. Then, Dr. Reed announced the recipient of Northwood's newly established Courage and Leadership Award. The spotlight found Zariah Blake, sitting calmly in the front row, as her name was called. A roar of applause, genuine and thunderous, erupted, swelling to a standing ovation. Zariah rose, her steps steady, her head held high. She ascended the podium, the very spot where Harrison had once pontificated, where Ryan had sought to spread his hate. She looked out at the faces before her students, teachers, parents, community members, even representatives from the local news. She saw fear in some, hope in others, and in many, a dawning understanding. She saw the familiar faces of Sarah and Mr. Henderson, their eyes shining with pride. She saw her parents, their expressions a mixture of relief and immense pride, their quiet endurance now vindicated by their daughter's bold actions. Zariah took a deep breath, the microphone cool beneath her fingers. She didn't speak of revenge or anger. Instead, her voice, clear and resonant, filled the vast space, carrying a message of profound resilience and hope. A few months ago, she began, her gaze sweeping across the crowd. This gym was a place of pain for me, a place where hate was displayed, and silence allowed it to flourish. I stood here, and I felt fear, but I also felt a deep, burning conviction that silence is not an option when injustice rears its head. She paused, allowing her words to sink in. My story isn't unique. Too many of us, for too long, have been told to be quiet, to endure, to not make waves. But waves are how the ocean cleanses itself. Waves are how change happens. The hair pulled from my head that day was more than just an act of cruelty. It was a symbol of all the invisible burdens that racism places on our shoulders. Her gaze sharpened, locking onto the faces of students, particularly those who had once averted their eyes. But here's what I learned. You are never truly alone, even when you feel most isolated. Look around you. There are always allies. There are always those who will stand with you, even if they're a quiet friend or a vigilant groundskeeper, or even a very good dog. A ripple of laughter, then a swell of knowing nods, spread through the audience. Justice isn't just about punishment, Zariah continued, her voice gaining a powerful cadence. It's about dismantling the systems that allow hate to thrive. It's about creating spaces where every single person feels safe, seen, and valued. It's about the uncomfortable conversations, the hard work of truly listening, and the courage to change, she concluded, her voice rising to a crescendo. So, if you see injustice, if you feel the weight of prejudice, do not be silent. Your voice is your most powerful weapon. Speak up. Stand tall. Because when we find our collective voices, when we refuse to let hate define our spaces, that is when true school spirit, true community, truly begins. That is when we truly belong, not just to Northwood, but to each other. Thank you. The applause that followed was deafening, a visceral outpouring of emotion. Students rushed forward, eager to shake her hand, to offer hugs, their faces reflecting a mixture of awe and inspired resolve. Zariah, accepting the award, felt a profound sense of peace. The girl who had once sought invisibility now stood bathed in the spotlight. Her message clear, her journey a powerful testament to the transformative power of courage. She had not only survived, she had forced an entire community to awaken, leaving an indelible mark on Northwood High. A message that would resonate far beyond its walls. The fiercest battles are fought not with fists, but with unwavering truth and the courage to speak it.